Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be doing another Canadian Soldier Reacts, and today we're looking at the U.S. Army 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions. What's the difference? Now, I've got to say right off the bat, I am not jump qualified. I'm what you call a leg, and that's by choice. In Canada, leg means two things, right? It means you get there, you get everywhere by using your legs, or it means leg, lack enough guts. That's not the case in my case. I've been skydiving, doesn't bother me in the least, but I never wanted to go to the Airborne Regiment, and I'll let you know why probably at some point during this video. So let's take a look.
The United States Army is home.
This guy again. This guy is General Discharge, I think he calls himself. He makes me laugh.
To a variety of legendary units with extensive histories on the battlefield. Two such units that stand out among the rest are the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions. While they may come from similar beginnings and share similar names, they have...
So, I think it's the 101st was in Band of Brothers, if I remember correctly. Probably one of my favorite TV shows ever. I was really impressed with what they did there.
Have grown to be two entirely...
Oh, so that is, I'm assuming the American version of the Canadian C8, 5.56 belt-fed, squad automatic weapon machine gun. The sight that they're using looks very similar to the Canadian 3-power scope sight, which is pretty cool. Yeah.
Different and successful U.S. Army divisions. With that said, what exactly do the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions do? Is one better than the other? What do they have in common? And most importantly, what makes them different? We're going to answer all of those questions for you and much more. This is 82nd Airborne Division versus 101st Airborne Division.
I think I've said this before well, I don't know about reserve units, but with all of the units that I've worked with, and I've worked with units from Canada, the United States, England, Luxembourg, Norway, Turkey, Greece, several others I can't remember off the top of my head, but most of them have been reasonably similar. Well, that's not true. Yeah, I want to be charitable and say that, but definitely the American units that I've worked with mostly. I've worked with a bunch of Marines in Turkey, and I worked with 10th Mountain Division extensively, and they have been just as highly trained as we were. So. Okay, it's going on too long.
The 82nd Airborne Division traces its roots all the way back to World War I. Originally stood up as the 82nd Division in the National Army, the division contained soldiers from each of the 48 states, a very unique thing for the time. To boost unit morale during World War I, many of the Army divisions were making nicknames for themselves. A contest was held to choose a nickname for the 82nd Division, and thousands of entries were submitted by the public.
So, it's been my experience that you don't get to choose your own nickname. That's interesting.
Out of the numerous entries, the winning choice came from Vivian Goodwin. She proposed the nickname the All-American Division, highlighting the fact that the division comprised soldiers from each state in the U.S. This moment marked the birth of the iconic All-American Division shoulder sleeve patch.
Well, that's interesting. That's something I never knew. So in my unit, two of the companies had nicknames. There was Alpha Company was the Duke of Edinburgh's company, or Duke's company, and that's because the patron of the company was the Duke of Edinburgh. And then Bravo Company was sometimes referred to as the City of London Company, because they're the company that received the keys to the City of London, Ontario, when we were stationed there. Charles didn't have a nickname. Delta didn't have a nickname. Echo and Foxtrot didn't. Yeah, no, that was it.
featuring a red square with a blue circle.
Well, so the RCR as a whole have two nicknames. One we gave ourselves, and one that we use when we are screwing with Americans. And we've done this a lot. RCR stands for, RCR actually stands for Royal Canadian Regiment. Okay. But we would call ourselves the Recce Commando Rangers, just when we're having a bit of fun. But anybody who knows us and all of the other units will call us Run Chicken Run. That's our nicknames.
Circle in the center. Over time, this patch would become one of the most widely recognized military symbols in the world.
I've definitely seen
Fast forward to
people with
World
that
War
patch.
II, the U.S. Army adopted and developed the Airborne concept, and the 82nd would be the first U.S. Army division to receive this designation. And from that point forward would be known as the 82nd Airborne Division. The 82nd Airborne
Yeah, so
Division
there's no
would
patch
play
like
a
that in
vital
Canada
role
that I
in
know
World
of.
War II, including D-Day, Battle of the Bulge, and Operation Market.
The only thing that marks you as airborne in Canada, there's two levels. So it's your jump wings. So there's a pair of wings on a maple leaf. So there's a maple leaf in the center, and then a long pair of white wings on either side. That that signals that you are jump qualified. If the maple leaf is red, that's called a cherry jumper. Those are people who have passed the course, and I believe it's a 3-week course, 3 or 6 week. I can't remember. Like I said, I haven't taken it. I have done the physical fitness test though. No issues. And then if you actually serve in either a jump company or back in the day the commando regiments, then you got a white maple leaf, and the white maple leaf was really what marked you as airborne. Well, that back in the day, and they had their own airborne cap badge. They had a special airborne cap badge before they got disbanded. We'll talk about that during this.
Garden. These were some of the largest and intense battles of the war. But what large and intense battles? World War II and into the early 1960s.
Okay. That looks like an HF set. I have not seen a man-packed HF set in a very long time. Of course, I guess this is a World War II video, so, I mean, that stands to reason better. But I'm pretty sure that's an HF radio right there.
The 82nd Airborne Division trained hard during the Cold War to become the nation's strategic reaction force. However, the 82nd did not participate in the Korean War because both Truman and Eisenhower...
Oh, we did. Korean War is one of the RCR battle honors. So is Afghanistan, by the way. My old unit, 1 RCR, and I think also 2 RCR, and possibly 2 PPCLI, all saw some pretty heavy fighting during Afghanistan.
Eisenhower chose to keep the division in strategic reserve in the event of a Soviet ground attack anywhere in the world. Despite that, they would move on to be utilized in the Vietnam War, Gulf War, and many of the major operations that took place
served in
after
the Gulf War.
9/11. Not only that, but they'd participate in Hurricane Katrina relief and would deploy often to the Middle East. Even recently,
Yeah, that's something that we did a lot too, is we did a lot of disaster relief. Yeah, like once a year or once every 2 years, we would get called out for some sort of disaster relief. And that's actually something, I may have mentioned this in another video, I can't remember, but there's no restriction on deploying Canadian troops inside Canada. Combat operations would require, I think, an act of parliament, but anything else that needs to be done, we deployed troops to do it all the time. Mostly firefighting, sometimes flood fighting, and once a big snowstorm in Toronto. Oh man, fun.
Recently, they were present for the Kabul evacuation in 2021. While the 82nd Airborne Division was the first of its kind during World War II, it certainly wasn't the only one. During the same month the 82nd Airborne Division was created, the US Army would also stand up the 101st Airborne Division, also known as the Screaming Eagles. Although the 101st Airborne Division had no history on the battlefield, the unit was ready to get to work. The unit's first commander, Major General William C. Lee, famously said that the 101st has no history, but has a rendezvous with destiny. As a division, the 101st has never failed that prophecy. The 101st Airborne would ferociously train for combat operations during World War II and were put to the test on D-Day, where their
Well, if Band of Brothers is even halfway accurate, I believe it. Holy crap, those guys went through hell.
pathfinders became the first Americans to set foot in occupied France.
So I think he's just said the Pathfinders. So Pathfinders, we have Pathfinders in Canada also, or patrol Pathfinders, I think they might call them now. It's essential. Pathfinders are essentially the reconnaissance arm of the airborne, or at least they are in Canada. They're the guys that are going to go in first. They're going to go in quietly. They're going to move around behind enemy lines, gathering intelligence, relaying it back. Then generally the airborne will jump in next. So they're jumping in force, and they are taking and holding some area of ground where they'll be able to set up, hopefully, a landing strip, whether it be for fixed wing or rotary wing aircraft, and then my unit would come in next. Usually air insertion with helicopters. And then my unit would then take and start pushing forward. That's the way things would work.
The division would play an integral part in the invasion of Normandy and would later play key roles in Operation Market Garden and Battle of the Bulge. During the Battle of the Bulge, the 101st would be surrounded in Bastogne, and the Germans demanded immediate surrender. This is where Brigadier General McAuliffe made
you jump in behind enemy lines and, you're going to get surrounded, so you got to be able to take care of yourself.
History with his classic reply, nuts. Following World War II, the 101st was inactivated. 2 decades later, the 101st was called upon again and would play an integral role in the Vietnam War. Fun fact, the 101st was nicknamed the Chicken Men by the Vietnamese during the Vietnam War because their eagle insignia looked like a chicken to them.
Run, chicken, run.
In 1968, the 101st shed their parachutes in favor of helicopter-borne operations, earning a brand new designation, the 101st Airborne Division Air Mobile. However,
so that's what we were, I mean, not 101st, but we were air mobile or air assault was one of our roles. We deployed most often in the Grizzlies, kind of similar to your Strikers. But our second most common method of transportation was Twin Huey or sometimes Chinooks. So definitely air assault.
Because of a shift in structure and orientation, the division was redesignated as the 101st Airborne Division Air Assault in 1974,
well, that's
which is
interesting.
how it remains to this day. Throughout the rest of the 20th century, the 101st would be involved in numerous operations in the Middle East. This would ramp up from the United States response.
So that makes them sound like they're a very similar unit to 1RCR then. Huh.
Response to 9/11 all the way into the present day. While the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions might share similar names, present day they are two completely different units. For starters, the 82nd Airborne is a true airborne division. What do we mean by that? Well, the 82nd Airborne conducts actual frequent airborne jumps, meaning jumping out of planes, and trains on airfield seizures. This is different from the 101st, which despite having the word airborne in its name, is not actually a true airborne division. It is an air assault division, meaning their soldiers rappel out of helicopters when inserting into a particular area of operations. Despite their differences, both are very...
Okay, so let's talk about airborne and air assault in Canada then. So when I first got in, the airborne was a regiment. The airborne regiment. Yeah, it was the airborne regiment. However, they were really only three companies, maybe heavy companies. I'm not quite sure on what their numbers were, but companies nonetheless. They had three shacks around the parade square, and it literally on the top of them was one commando, two commando, three commando. Um, in I want to say 1993, they got themselves in trouble in Africa. So the reason I never wanted to go to the Airborne was that there were a lot of discipline problems in the Airborne Regiment. Now, let's be clear. I know a lot of people who come from the Airborne Regiment, and I know a lot of the best soldiers in the Canadian military who have come out of the Airborne Regiment. In fact, two two soldiers, George, who was my section commander in battle school, and Rob, who was a sergeant who I met actually on a Terry Fox run, a 10K Terry Fox run. Probably the two best soldiers I've ever met in my entire life. I still respect them to this day. But having said that, there were still a lot of discipline problems in the Airborne Regiment. I want to say 2 months ish before they were deployed to Africa when they got themselves in trouble, a bunch of them lit the duty sergeant's car on fire on the parade square. Right? They had serious discipline problems. Whenever 1RCR was in Petawawa, and when we finally moved up to Petawawa, we would go out to the local bars. There was one just off of base called Sassy's. We called it Smashies because we got into so many fights with those guys. And almost every single time our guys won. But what these guys had was a gang mentality, literally like a New York hood gang mentality. And you know, they couldn't beat us unless they had double our numbers. So I got a real bad taste in my mouth for the Canadian Airborne Regiment. Now, when they were in Africa, I'm not going to go into the whole thing. You can look it up. It's news. You can find all of the details. But to make a long story short, a prisoner died while he was in their care, and the step was taken to disband the regiment. Now, what does disband the regiment mean? It means that the name went away, but all of the soldiers literally just went back to their home units. I can't remember which commando was from which unit, but one of the commandos was completely from RCR, one of the commandos was completely from PPCLI, and one of the commandos was completely from the Vandus. So they went back to their home units and they spread out, or their home regiments, and they spread out in their home regiments among the three battalions in each of their home regiments. Now in the RCR, what happened next was three RCR stood up a jump company. So when they were airborne, they wore maroon berets with an airborne cap badge. When they went back to jump companies, if you were actually on jump status in the jump company, you would wear your maroon beret, but you would wear your RCR cap badge. So the capability, the commando capability stayed, but we lost the commando designation. And that really mirrors the difference that you're seeing here between the 82nd and the 101st, whereas 3RCR has the jump company, not a battalion. Keep in mind, there's only 68,000 people in all of the Canadian forces. So 3RCR had the jump company, and 1RCR was the air assault battalion, among other things. But anyway, let's keep going.
The elite have large budgets and rapidly deploy.
I wouldn't say we have large budgets, but rapidly deploy, we were on, I said this before, we were never on anything longer than 48 hours notice to move. We were always on 48 hours notice to move or less, and frequently 24 hours or even less notice to move if things were happening. We were definitely the rapid deployment force for Europe specifically. We were part of the Ace Mobile Force combat group for Europe.
Things. The 82nd Airborne is an airborne infantry division specially trained and equipped to leapfrog enemy lines and establish an entry points for advancing ground forces. The 82nd is one of the largest and most frequently deployed combat units in the U.S. Army. Can mobilize, load, and land anywhere in the world in less than 36 hours to perform combat operations, assist U.S. allies, and provide humanitarian assistance.
Yeah, very similar.
Its soldiers can be distinguished from other military service members by their maroon berets. If you enjoy our content and fun fact, even though the main separator between the 82nd and 101st is air assault capabilities, the
You know, I'm looking at these guys, and a lot of the kit that they're using is almost exactly the same as what we use. Although this, I don't know what it is. I mean, we've got the M204 undermounted grenade launchers. There's like, I think, 1 or 2 per section, I think. But other than that, that looks like a C8. The scope is a little bit different. All of our scopes look like that one that you saw in the squad automatic weapon earlier. But other than that, I mean, it's very similar what you're seeing here.
The 82nd does conduct some air assault missions from time to time. But again, air assault is the 101st's bread and butter. So much so that the 101st Airborne Division is the only...
Yeah, so we did some fast roping. Most of the time we would do rappelling out of helicopters. Or, to be honest, more often, the only time you rappel out of a helicopter is if there's something was wrong with the terrain that you were trying to land in, or even fast rope. Otherwise, they'd set down, let you out, and go. You would put 4 or 8 people, I think it was 8 people you could put in a twin-engine Huey. 2 on each side and 4 down the center seat, I think. They would set down, we would be out of that helicopter in our positions, and that helicopter would be gone in under 10 seconds. We were practiced. Now this, what they're showing here, this is not something that we did. I think it was a special Loadmasters course to do the sling loading stuff, but everything else, every one of us was taught it.
Air Assault Division of the U.S. Army. It provides an unmatched expeditionary air assault capability to conduct forcible entry and other worldwide unified land operations in support of combatants' commanders. Its Combat Aviation Brigade, which is home to its aircraft, is the most decorated aviation unit in the U.S. Army. They've flown hundreds of thousands of hours transporting millions of troops and hold a record for the...
Yeah, so we had... So I've only ever worked with 2 different squadrons, helicopter squadrons. I want to say the 427th in Petawawa and the 403 in Gagetown. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. But interesting story. So we were doing enemy force. Was it enemy force? No, we weren't in. Yes, we were enemy force, right. Haha, yeah. So there was a big exercise going on. It was mostly reserves. This was in Petawawa. We were doing enemy force, and we were doing air insertions by Chinook. So I was a master corporal at the time, but I was the navigator for the company. And oh my God, I pissed off this lieutenant, second lieutenant, because they set us down. So 30 people, whole platoon can fit in a Chinook. They set us down. We were out in 10, 15 seconds. The helicopter lifts off. I immediately get up and I start heading towards, there was a cliff that was about 100 meters away, and I started heading towards it. Now, I'm the navigator, so the guys are conditioned to follow me. So the guys started getting up one by one and started following me. And I went over the edge of this cliff and down into a swamp. There was a swamp 20 meters down or something like that. And straight into that swamp, probably about 100 meters in. And this lieutenant was bitching the whole way. Not 5 minutes later, an entire company of grizzlies showed up where we had just landed. And they fanned out, started searching, but they would not. They refused to go into the swamp. Grizzlies can't drive through a swamp anyway, so they would have had to have dismounted and walked into that swamp. So they went away thinking that, I don't know what they thought, to be honest, but they never found us. And we spent the night in that swamp. I got more stories about that swamp and that day. That was fun. Oh, man. Anyway, let's keep going.
Longest air assault in history. Both the 82nd and 101st are broken down into brigade combat teams, which is the basic deployable unit of maneuver in the US Army. Looking at things at a high level, they are both structured to have a headquarters element, 3 brigade combat teams, a combat aviation brigade, and a sustainments brigade.
This marks the
To today's sponsor, War Thunder, to be first act US Army unit. If you're interested in learning more about some of them,